Mist and arrow-feathered reeds clung to the trident like morning veils, and the river ran a fat, sluggish red where men had churned it with iron and fury. Crows worked already, black knots on banks of trampled sedge, picking at those who had shouted themselves hoarse with love for lords and king and freedom and vengeance and any word that could make dying easier. A horse struggled in the shallows, eyes rolling, guts unspooling like a string of pearls. The sound it made was a wet, breaking bell. Rhaegar Targaryen stood knee-deep in the river he had bled to hold, his blackened breastplate glimmering with a few stubborn rubies that clung like winter berries. The others were gone to the water, scattered across the ford or lost in the mud churned by hooves and boots. He held his sword low, point under the surface, a pale line wavering in the current like a river fish. His breath smoked in the cooling air. The day had bellowed and burned, and now evening folded itself around the trampled fields, bringing the sharp smell of torn earth and forge-hot blood to heal. "You should sit," Ser Barristan said in a voice roughened by blood behind his teeth. His white cloak was a rag of red, and his helm clutched in one hand showed the dent where Robert Baratheon's hammer had kissed it. "You're struck." "I am alive," Rhaegar answered without looking away from the body slumped on the stony bank. Robert lay there on his back, gape-mouthed, beard matted with gore and river silt. The hammer that had been the pride of Storm's End lay 3 strides off, half submerged where the river licked at it with idle tongue. A smile, no, the ghost of one, still hung at the corner of Robert's mouth as if he had found some last jest to take with him. When Rhaegar closed the man's eyes, his fingers left thin streaks of red across the lids. "Cover him," Rhaegar said. "He will have a cairn here and a barge downriver to his kin. He was not a good foe, Ser Barristan. He was a great one." They wrapped Robert in a ripped banner, someone's stag and crown, stained into one color, and Rhaegar stood with the calm of a man listening to his own heartbeat as runner after runner splashed up to him with names. Lord Lewin Martell had fallen on the left. Ser Jonathan Darry taken an arrow in the thigh but lived. The Darry standard lost. Lord Rhaegar Riverside accounted for. Lord Mutun dead. The Northmen broken, the River Lord scattering, Lord Will's spears closing their circle around the ford. His captains spoke their tidings like men piling wood, and Rhaegar watched the stack rise until it was enough to heat a winter. When at last he lifted his chin to the clouds retreating from the sunset, the weight of the day settled around his name like iron. The warriors called him Prince still. The river made of him something else. He saw the ford as it would be remembered. A string of rub-leather songs, children hunting rubies in the shallows, men telling each other they had seen a blow-cleave man and horse both, women remembering the look on their husbands' faces on the morning they kissed them and went away. Legend would want simplicity. Legend would want blood and brightness and the hammer and the prince in black armor like a night sky full of red stars. Legend would lie. "My prince," said Ser Barristan a last time. "This cold." Rhaegar raised one gloved hand and let the river run through the fingers. "Do you hear it? The water running. It will run long after we are whispers, Ser." He sank his sword point deep and drew it up clean. His blade had drunk enough of the trident. "Send a rider south and another east. We hold the field. Send for the ravens. We will offer terms." "Terms?" Ser Jonathan's face was still greenish from loss of blood. His thick hair clung in ropes about his temple. "Eddard Stark will not bend now. Not after. Robert is dead," Rhaegar said, and in the saying it became a door which had already shut behind them. "Words must change with the world." He sheathed the sword. "Lord Stark will not love me, but he will love his people. We will send him an escort to Riverrun safe conduct. I will have him hear me. And the king." Ser Barristan's eyes, the color of old parchment, steadied. "In King's Landing." Rhaegar's mouth flattened. "I ride tonight." He left the ford before the moon had climbed the broken spine of the hills, and the air grew thinner and colder as the road unspooled south under him. They cantered in a half-quiet broken only by the jingle of tack and the occasional grunt from a wounded man gritting teeth on a whetstone. As they pressed through a wind that still smelled of leaf mold and the first fires in farmhouses, he found his fingers drifting to the harp case that rode behind his saddle. Foolish talisman, child's security. Yet touch would find touch. He thought of the Tower of Joy, its pale stones hot as bread under the mountain sun, and the girl in its shade with black hair spilled like ink over linen. He thought of Elia, with her mild dark mouth and the tiredness that had become a part of her the way braid becomes part of hair. He thought of his father, and here his hand left the harp case to knot on the reins until the leather squealed in protest. By dawn's first wash they were at the mouth of the King's Road, and the red keep's outline had bitten against the sky. The city lay humming, as a hive hums, indifferent to the beekeeper's fortunes. They camped in a stand of alder and birch. Rhaegar slept for an hour, then rose with body and mind snapping back into armor together. The cold of the morning made steam of the horses, and he dressed himself with his own hands while Ser Barristan watched him in a way that a father might watch his son. "Send a man ahead," Rhaegar said. "Not a herald, a rider, fast and quiet. Tell him to find Ser Jaime Lannister. Tell him." He stepped into his shows, the metal kissing his calves. "Tell him to keep certain men close and certain men away, the pyromancers for one, and the city watch, and tell him to do nothing. Say it again even more plainly. Do nothing until I come. Ser Jaime." Ser Barristan's mouth peeled in something like distaste. "He is young for the burden. He is a boy," Rhaegar said, "who was told he was a man, and has been doing his best to be the lie. He will keep his sword sheathed if I put my hand over his. What if Lord Tywin comes? Then he will find the gates closed," Rhaegar said, "and the choice to go home or play wolf at the door. He will not like to scratch." In the city the bells were never silent. Some priest somewhere always found reason to ring for a birth or a death or the orisons of cooling the anvil. That morning they carried a nervous undersong. Rhaegar smelled smoke as he crossed the first bridge into the fish market. Not fire but cooking, and this cheered him in a way that surprised him with its intensity. Cook fires meant breakfast, meant wives and husbands scolding children to eat, and old men shaving at silvered bowls with stale jokes. The city was still a city. They went up the hill with the market's cries falling away, up past the red cloaks of the city watch with their indifferent faces and their heaped swords, and took the long stair into the keep. Rhaegar had knelt on those steps once as a boy to tie the torn strap of a sandal, and then in his childish vanity had thought that the red of the stone was in some way his blood given early to the place. Now his feet sounded hard on the risers. The steps took his weight without complaint. At the doors to the throne room they met Ser Jaime. He was very young at 17, which still surprised Rhaegar, for there were men who made 17 look like 20 and men who made it look like 12, and Jaime Lannister had always shimmered between the two. He had the beauty that knives have, and the restlessness, and his white cloak swept over an arm like a swallow's wing. He bowed his gold head, not low, and Rhaegar saw that his hair had darkened with sweat. That sweat might have been fear. Rhaegar did not think so. "Your Grace," Jaime said. The title landed between them and lay there, bright and dangerous. "Not yet," Rhaegar said, very soft. "Open the doors." The hall sucked them in. Dragons watched from the walls with green-black eyes like old swords. The skulls were long since sent down to the cellars by some hand-wringing maester, but Rhaegar had grown up in these chambers, and the memory of the skulls was another sort of furniture. On the throne sat Aerys Targaryen, second of his name, and the room smelled at once of lavender and piss. Varys stood at the king's sly hand like a piece of court furniture that had the miracle of speech. Grand Maester Pycelle had the starched look of laundry boiled too long, and 3 pyromancers in robes of charred velvet hunched together in quiet communion like carrion birds choosing where to begin. His father turned his head and smiled all his teeth. "Ah," he said, "my son." Rhaegar took 7 steps and bowed. He did not kiss the floor. "Father, it is done then?" Aerys' hands were very thin today. There were weeks when he was all eyes and hands, all hunger and trembling. Wine soured in his breath. "You have killed the stag." "The stag fell," Rhaegar said, and kept his eyes on the floor of red and black marble, so that he would not see the way his father's hair had grown in gray patches like mold in an old loaf. "He died a fighting man, and we will give him due honor." The field is ours. I have sent riders to gather the scattered men and to take the oaths of those lords who—" "Traitors," Aerys said, but his teeth worried the word like a bone with no meat. "Traitors all. Bring me their heads. Bring me Eddard Stark's head. Bring me Jon Arryn, the old hawk. Bring me Hoster Tully. Bring me the boy with the belly full of girls." He blinked, uncertain which name he had meant by that. "Bring me his sister. Bring me them all. Burn the lot of them. Burn their keeps until you can see the black smoke from Old Town." Rhaegar breathed in. The air was thick with the pressed flower rot of the tapestries. He had walked into this place 1,000 times, and it had never yet suffocated him. Could now. "Father," he said, steady, "we have won the day. Now we must win the realm." Aerys' tongue touched the scab at the corner of his mouth. "We will win it with fire." No, Rhaegar's voice had in it the metal he had never liked to hear. He had his mother's voice once, the soft Valyrian lilt, and had trained himself to use it as others train themselves with dumbbells. Now something else spoke. "There will be no burning of the city. I have smelled enough burning." The pyromancers moved as one like a flock of startled birds. "The caches lie in readiness, your grace," said the tallest one. Rossart, Rhaegar remembered, with the knobby hands and the smile like a breaking crust. "Under the septs, under the gates, under the dragon pit. A word. And word." Aerys hissed, delighting in the shape. "Say the word, prince. Say it. Say, burn them all." His nails rasped at the arms of the throne. "You owe me that word. I made you. You were a tear in your mother's eye until I put my—" He leaned forward, savoring the indecency like a fish cleaving into dirty water, and Rhaegar felt something in his chest pull like cloth caught at a nail. He went up the steps as men watched the way a hall watches a duel, seeing it as if through glass. 6 steps, 7, and the sword came out of him like a thought. "To say no is also a king's word," he said. He did not point the blade at his father. He let the fact of it be enough. Ser Jaime moved, just a shift of weight, and his hand opened to show his palm empty. Varys's lids drooped until his eyes were nothing but smile lines. Pycelle's mouth, always yam-bright, did a fish's astonished "oh." Aerys laughed high and thin. "You dare." Rhaegar looked down at him with a love so pure it remade hatred. The shame of it was an old truth. A boy loves his father past reason. It had taken him too long to grow the other necessary truths. "I am trying to save you," he said. "Save me." His father's spittle glittered in the lantern light. "Strike me down. Go on. Be done. Take your throne the way the usurper would have. Fuck your whore and raise your—" Jaime flinched as if he had been struck, and Rhaegar heard the hiss of breath from Ser Barristan behind him. He thought, "I cannot keep what I win if I win it this way." He thought, "If I must be Cain, then let it be without a brother's blood." In the silence that had carved itself from the noisy air, the 3 pyromancers began to breathe like bellows, high and fast, ready to make something flare. "Jaime," Rhaegar said without turning his head. "Prince," Jaime said, a click in his throat. "If any of the king's servants moves to give a word or light a taper in the service of burning this city, take their heads," Rhaegar said. "If he tries to give the word, take his hands." His father's eyes went wide and white as egg, and he screamed. He screamed as if someone had put fire to him, and perhaps the memory of it did. The scream went on until it webbed and tore. Rhaegar did not know when he sheathed his sword, but he must have, because he took his father's hand then and felt the bone under the skin like a bird in a fist. "Give me the ring," he said softly. "The king's ring." Somewhere a servant shook so that a tray clattered. Varys, who never shook, glided forward with the little velvet box, and when Rhaegar slid the ring onto his own finger, he felt the strangeness of it like a small creature moving against his marrow. "Lord Varys," he said. "My prince." Varys almost purred. "Send ravens. Summon what lords are within 10 days' ride. Tell them a great council shall meet. Tell them the city is secure and open to those who come with peace in their hands." "And if they come with wolves?" Varys said with mild delight in the symmetry. Then they will find the Lannister host warming itself at their fire, Rhaegar said. We do not provoke Lord Tywin. We do not open the gates to him. I want his letter before his person. He glanced at Jaime, whose gold head had come up a little. Sir Jaime, you will remain with his grace. He is to be kept comfortable. No blade but yours and Ser Barristan's near him. The pyromancers are to be confined to their manse and kindly fed nothing at all. Jaime's smile was swifter than a sparrow's. As you command, Pycelle clucked. Your Highness, I would beg permission to send for Lord. You will beg nothing, Rhaegar said, and Pycelle subsided like a snapped bellows. He turned on his heel and went. His cloak moved behind him with the soft sound of a river against a boat's planking. Elia waited for him in the solar. The light there had always been easy. Some old king had chosen these windows for the way the afternoon sun made the dust dance over the rushes. She stood with her hand on the cradle where their son slept, and the serenity with which she had watched the crush of court all these years lay over her face like varnish over paint. Yet when she saw him, she put her hands to her mouth like any girl, and laughter ran out of her in a stripped, honest sound he had not heard in too long. You are whole, she said, and then, forgive me. Seeing the smear of blood on his collar, he kissed her brow. He kissed their daughter in her play nest, Rhaenys with her fishing rod doll catching imagined trout from a basin. He kissed their son's soft skull and felt the rounded heat of him through the down. He did not think of prophecy then. He thought only of the way a child's breath smells of milk and apples. Luwin, Elia said, her voice small. He took her hand. He fell bravely. She closed her eyes. A tremor went through her and was gone. He was too old to see the son of Dorne again, she said, and in that heard a kind of mercy that made his heart twist. He told her then what he had done, and what he had not done. Elia listened as she had always listened when he spoke of duty. The slight tilt of the head, the composed mouth, the judgment in her eyes not unkind but never withheld. When he spoke the name Lyanna, that composure went very still as water does when wind drops. So, she said at last, you will bring her to court? No, he rubbed his ring with his thumb until the skin burned. Not now, not yet. There is a road, and it is narrow. I must not fall from it. Elia's mouth, which could be ruthlessly tender, lifted one corner. A road. If only roads were all you saw, Rhaegar, and not stars. He wished, as he sometimes had wished as a younger man, that she would rage at him and demand and fling whatever words she had like stones. Her mildness demanded more of him. I will go to her, he said. I will see to her safety. I will see to the child. And then I will call the lords and the faith, and I will say to them what has been done. What has been done cannot be undone with words, Elia said, but words can dress it well. She touched his face, palm cool. I am glad you are alive. He held her hand at his cheek and wished he were only a husband, or only a father, or only a prince who had been told what to be. On the wall the afternoon made a lens of light and dust, and Rhaegar looked into it as if he could see the future arranged there the way some men see shapes in fireplace embers. He left for the Tower of Joy with the dusk, taking with him only Ser Barristan and 10 of his swifts, and one gray bundle of silk tied beneath his cloak. Word had already gone to Riverrun with an escort and peace prayers written in the ink of authority. A raven to the Eyrie for Jon Arryn. A polite letter folded like a knife to Casterly Rock. He sent for Arthur Dayne not because he needed him but because he wanted him. He would find him at the tower. The road into the Red Mountains was a spine the wind had been chewing on since the world's first morning. No day. Sand ran and slid and was caught again in the nooks and elbows of stone. They crossed a dry riverbed and saw lizards scuttle like coins flicked into the sun. In the heat after Cool City there was the dream of boyhood summers with his brother and sister. They had come to Dorne once, and Viserys had complained like a kettle. Rhaella had smiled and fanned herself and pointed to the thorn bushes with small white blossoms like stars and said, Rhaegar, sing for me. He had sung. He had not sung at this road's end. The Tower of Joy reared up from the naked earth like a single clean tooth laid by a god, without crenel or machicolation, its pale stones scrubbed with light. The three who guarded it came out to meet him with their swords in their hands, for they would not have been the men they were if they had done otherwise. "Prince," said Arthur Dane, and the light ran along Dawn's strange milk-glass lines. There had been children's names for that sword. Rhaegar had one of them still in his mouth, but the man before him was not a storybook knight, and this was not a storybook day. "Arthur," Rhaegar said, and the rest of it did not need saying between them. Ser Oswell went bowed with grave courtesy. Ser Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, watched him with the same unmoving, steadfast gaze with which he had watched Rhaegar's childhood tutor lectures. The boy spar that had sprung a nosebleed, the marriage in the sept when Rhaegar had taken Elaya's small, gentle hand in both of his. They stood aside and he went in. The tower smelled of limes warding off the damp, and of the sharp, scrubby herbage of these mountains. He heard Lyanna before he saw her, heard the low murmur of a man's voice, and then the answering laugh which in the last months had been rare. The breath caught in his throat at the sound of it, not for desire but for simple gladness, as when you find an injured bird and it eats from your palm at last and you know it will live. She was sitting by the narrow window in her shift, hair unbound and black as a raven's wing where the sun struck it. In her arms lay the child, small and dangerous as a knife in a sleeve. Her gray eyes went wide and lit as his fell on her, and then narrowed swift, in that way she had when the world tried something on for size and she found it wanting. "You're alive," Lyanna said, which might have been reproof or relief or both. In her mouth those were twins. "You look like the end of a song. An end with a beginning under it," he said. He knelt. He saw how thin she had become, and anger twisted in him. At the world, at himself, at the logic that had made a bright girl take refuge in a tower where gods and men could not look her in the eye. "Did you kill him?" Her tone was flat. Her small, fine-boned hand moved, the knuckle grazing their son's downy cheek. "Robert." "I did," Rhaegar said, and the whole room seemed to taste of iron for a moment. "He died as men say they wish to. His strength was considerable. I held myself to skill and luck beyond my allotment. Lyanna, I do not think I took more than my share." She nodded, eyes gone to some corner he could not reach. The rumors had always had her proud. Pride, he had learned, is a kind of solitude. "So it is done." "Not done," he said. His hand found the child before he knew he meant it to, the tiny chest like a sparrow's against his palm. "I have come to keep what we made alive. I will not lie to you. It will be hard." Her mouth crooked. "You haven't lied to me yet. Don't start now." He told her what he had done in the throne room and what he had not done. He told her about the letters he had sent like stones dropped into a still pond, and the rings of consequence they would make. He told her he would not hide her forever. The air felt thin. The child snuffled at her breast and then slept, as if the world could be trusted. "What will you name him?" Lyanna said. "You always have names on your tongue, with your old books and your dead kings." Rhaegar's mouth was dry. He had thought of Eamon. "My uncle's name," said the boy in him who had listened at night at Summerhall to old tales. But prophecy made claiming too much too fast an arrogance that could bend back on you and break your neck. He remembered Jaehaerys, the conciliator, a king who had made peace between dragons and doves. Perhaps peace needed a name in someone's mouth again. "Jaehaerys," he said, "if you will it." She looked down at the sleeping face. "Jaehaerys, will he live to be old enough to taste it on his own tongue?" "If I can give him that, I will," Rhaegar said. "If I cannot, I will die trying." She put her hand on his. "You must not die. Not while his head still smells like milk." It was the touch that undid him. He bent his head to her fingers and breathed in the salt of her skin. "You cannot come to court," he said into her knuckles. "Not now. The faith would make a spectacle of you. There will be lords who would make a weapon of it. I will bring all down with one hand if I try to hold all up with the other." "I did not ask you to," Lyanna said, and gentled the reproach with how she smoothed his hair back in the ancient language of women. "But I will not be hidden like a sin. I am not a sin. I will not be your shame." "You are not," he said fiercely, and then softer. "Not to me, but a king has many eyes looking through his, and some see only the stories they have brought with them. The good people of King's Landing love their noise. I would spare you their mouths. Spare me? That flash of anger. He loved it. He feared it. I am a Stark of Winterfell. Do you think I have not been gossiped at? I can stand it. Yes, he said. But can the realm? She looked out the window to the line of mountains cutting the sky. What will you do? Hold a council. Put the ring on before men who will call it lawful. Speak plainly to them. Offer mercy and take hostages and give them marriages to dream on. Bring the Lannisters to my side. Why? Without giving them my throat. Quiet the Tyrells. Bring Dorne into sun with me and not shadow. Make peace with Jon Arryn. Spare Eddard Stark. Go to Winterfell and look his father's old gods in their hard faces. Put my hand to the wall stones and feel if they are colder than they should be. He hadn't meant to say the last aloud, but he did not take it back. And I will come to you and to our son, as often as I can without breaking what I am trying to mend. She let out a breath that did not bring ease. You speak as if it can be done. It must be done, he said. That is how men accomplish impossible things. They call them necessary. She smiled terribly. And if it cannot? He did not have that answer. He laid his palm on his son's belly and felt it rise and fall. He drew from his cloak then the gray silk bundle and unfolded it to show a small crown wrought of silver filigree set with 3 chips of garnet, red as pomegranate seeds. A winter crown, he said. Old Valyria made these for children who were meant for snow, or so the old book said. It is foolishness, he added when Lyanna's brows rose. But sometimes a symbol is a knife when you have no other, and sometimes it is a poultice. I would have him own the winter before the winter owns him. You will make him a story. Gently she took the thing between her fingers. Very well. Stories are stronger than most men. But you must ask my brother to teach this story to walk in leather boots and not trip over its own tail. He smiled in spite of himself. I will ask Lord Eddard to be my friend. That you cannot ask, Lyanna said. But you can ask him to be your ally. The morning after, 2 riders came up. One with a pale frog-speared banner that Lyanna recognized before anyone else did. Howland, she breathed, standing. And behind him Eddard Stark rode into the tower's shadow, tall and grave, mud to the knee, boy somehow despite the recent winter that had cut his face. When he saw Rhaegar on the steps, his hand fell to the hilt of the sword on his hip without conscious thought, and the look that went across his face was not hate and not love and not anything Rhaegar could have named without lying. My lord, Rhaegar said, bowing as a man might bow in a lord's hall, not in a king's. You are most welcome. There were men who did not think I would be, Eddard said, and his eyes slid to Arthur Dayne, to Gerald Hightower, to Oswell Went. They were polite masks and courtesies and swords in the sun. Then Eddard saw his sister. It was a boy's face then, suddenly. The cool broke and what had been set cracked. Lyanna moved first, and Rhaegar stood aside as she went down the steps and fell into the arms of her brother. It was a sound like a sob, and a laugh and winter breaking apart. When Eddard had touched his sister's hair with both hands, as if to convince them they were not just hands but something with power, when he had satisfied himself that Lyanna was not a ghost conjured by thirst, he looked up at Rhaegar again with a caution that was almost exhaustion. My lord, he said, what would you have of me? Your counsel, Rhaegar said. Your trust where you can spare it. Your sword where you must. I have given much of my trust to Graves lately, Eddard said. I have a wife at Riverrun who has never seen my face and wears my name. I have men who followed me for love of Robert and love of a father who burns no more. I have a lord who is my father no longer, and a king who asks me to kneel when my knees are made of fresh-thawed ground. If you want these things, you must tell me why I should give them. Rhaegar could have spoken of the law of traitor and pardon traitor. He could have spoken of mercy, the cheap kind that costs little and buys you a few nights of good sleep. He did not. He turned his palm up and showed the callus at the base of his fingers a harp makes and the small scars a sword makes and the ring a king makes, and said, Because I will give you my son to teach to stand in your snow. Because I will call him by a winter's name. Because I will put no knife to the neck of your gods to make them my lords. because this realm needs someone honest to be the stone in its wall. Because I would rather be counseled by a man who sees my faults and says them than by flattering mouths that will eat me when I drink. Because I loved your sister before I knew her name and love her now in a way that makes me fear the gods' humor. Because I am not my father and will prove it every day until it is not a sentence that must be said. The wind tugged at their cloaks. Howland Reed's quick, clever eyes moved like minnows. Arthur Dane smiled the smallest of smiles at the dust. At last Eddard nodded once. I will take your letter with its seal to Riverrun, he said. I will bring my wife to Winterfell and plant your promises in the ground and see if they sprout. I will bring my sister home before the leaves fall, if she will come. I will stand when you ask me to stand and bend when you ask me to bend, so long as there is nothing in the bending that breaks me. And if you lie to me, I will cut you. Rhaegar bowed his head. It is good to have terms, he said, and his relief was not a king's grand theater but something humbler and truer. Come and meet your nephew. Eddard took the child without the awkwardness of men who have not held many. He had the stark hands, accustomed to wait. He looked down at the little face and something changed in his, as if a room had been opened inside him and air let in. What is his name? He asked, voice gone softer than silk. Jaehaerys? Lyanna said before Rhaegar could, and for an instant an old childhood wickedness looked out of her eyes. Do not choke upon it. Jaehaerys? Eddard repeated, and the name became something like an oath. The boy sneezed. He has our mother's stubborn chin. Gracious, he has your father's hair already. Howland put in, irreverent. Rhaegar found that he loved the man then for providing the world with a levity only the brave can manage. He would need brave men who laughed. They left with promises like a net across them, and Rhaegar turned his horse's head toward King's Landing and the 1,000 tasks that awaited. He left Arthur Dane and 2 of the 3 with Lyanna. Gerald Hightower he took, for he wanted the White Bull's unmoving steadiness at court, and for the knowledge of it he allowed himself a childish comfort. On the 3rd day out they met a messenger with Tywin Lannister's letter, a beautifully penned document on thick paper smelling of old money and a glove of velvet over an iron fist. Casterly Rock congratulated the prince on his victory and laid the Lannister duty and loyalty to the Targaryen crown at his feet in language refined by long practice. Tywin spoke of long service, of the peace he had wrung from the realm in his tenure as hand, of youth and strength and the need for wise counsel. There was no request for office in the letter, but the shape of the request was everywhere, like the shape of a hound's impatience at a door. Rhaegar read it twice and passed it to Ser Barristan. He will come, he said. He will want to be open the way a cask wants tapping. And will you open him? Barristan asked. I will offer him a cup, Rhaegar murmured, and a small smile touched his mouth with heat. But I will draw from a different cask. The great council convened in a city holding its breath. Lord Hoster Tully came, grimmer even than rumor had made him, with Catelyn Tully at his side in a blue gown that did not quite hide the newness of her wedding band, and with Lisa Tully in pale green and eyes that slid like minnows. Jon Arryn descended from the Eyrie with the gravity of a man who has done heavy things his whole life and knows when someone lighter would have dropped them. Mace Tyrell arrived late with a tale of siege valor as fat as his throat, and a protest that Stannis Baratheon held still with a stubbornness unnatural in one so young. He spoke of onions with deep offense, as if onions were treachery made bulb. From Dorne came Prince Doran Martell, smiling like shade, and behind him the panther-sharp gaze of Oberyn with his unhidden anger braided into tricky grace. The Lannisters were last. Tywin Lannister entered the hall with all the weight of gold and policy. Cersei walked to his left, the candlelight finding her hair like fire in old wine and making a bright lie of innocence over the greed of her mouth. Jaime came in white, young and winged like a death that had not yet learned whose house it haunted. Tyrion limped a pace behind, wild eyes skipping from dragon to lord to feathered cap. Rhaegar saw in them the quickness that sees where divisions will split easiest and put a wedge there. They knelt and rose, and the business of absolving a kingdom of treason began. It was a long business. Words were hammered into commas, unhorsed, dusted, set back up again. Rhaegar spoke more than he liked, and made silence do work where he could. He said father where he had to in Ares when a man had to remember the king was at last only a man. He named Jon Arryn Lord Protector of the Vale anew, and later, when Tywin's mouth tightened nearly invisible, named Jon Arryn Hand of the King. Jon bowed as if the floor had offered him a gift. Tywin bowed as if he had tasted something sour and would never say so. Rhaegar offered Lord Hoster Tully mercy and demanded in return certain hostages of good faith. Hoster agreed and surrendered Edmure with a look that suggested he wished Edmure were a sack of barley instead. To Mace Tyrell he gave thanks and a command to lift his siege at Storm's End and accept Stannis Baratheon's surrender on terms that would leave the young lord with his honor and his keep and his life. Mace puffed and protested. Oberyn smiled without showing teeth. Doran breathed in as if he could smell old smoke. When Rhaegar met Tywin's eyes, he read the message there. The West had wanted much and would now get less and would keep a tally. In the Great Sept they put a ring on Rhaegar's finger in sight of the gods of men who needed to be reassured by stones. He swore an oath that did not burn his tongue. Aerys was spared the humiliation of attendance. He remained in his chambers with kindly silence around him and good food and a watch of 2 white cloaks who did not sleep. The High Septon, robed in cloth so heavy it must have been penance, intoned. Rhaegar listened and thought of the wall and of a boy's name whispered together with a dragon's name under mountain sun. After the council Jon Arryn came with his grave old face and said only, "We have made a peace that is a rope bridge. We will walk it without looking down." "I have been looking down my whole life," Rhaegar said. "I must stop before I pitch forward into the fear." "Do not stop seeing that there is a chasm," Jon said, not unkindly. "You have named me your hand. I will slap your hand when it reaches for better music than the moment can afford." Rhaegar smiled without showing teeth. "I will thank you for the bruise." When Stannis Baratheon came, he was lean as a fasting dog and as ready to bite. He had the look of a man who has eaten onion soup enough to smell it in his dreams, and he bristled at courtesy as if it were a winter coat forced on him in heat. Mace Tyrell insisted on being present when Rhaegar received him, as if the boy lord of Dragonstone might dart at him with a knife if unobserved. Rhaegar sat with the sunlight in the windows and the sound of the court a far hum like bees, and said, "Lord Stannis." "Your Grace," Stannis answered, and the words fit his mouth like a borrowed bit. "Will you have my head for treason, or only my keep?" "I will have you keep your head, keep your keep, and keep your promise," Rhaegar said evenly. "You and yours will swear me fealty. You will take my brother's place as Warden of the East once he is old enough to stand, until such time as it pleases me to name otherwise. You will hold Dragonstone in my name. You will release such prisoners as you have taken. You will cease being a siege and begin being a lord." Stannis's mouth worked as if he had forgotten for a moment how speaking goes. "And Robert, we have buried him by the Trident among his men. His mother will be sent his bones so that she may do him honor in her way. His memory will be allowed in high places as well as low. I will not have him made a villain in song." Stannis looked at the floor, perhaps to find some seam to pick at with his eyes. "He was a fool," he said dully, "but he was my brother." "He was the realm's grief," Rhaegar said. "We will not grind his bones to add to our bread." Stannis supplied a strangled noise that might have been a laugh if it had learned how to live in a human throat. He knelt without flourish and gave his oath with the bitterness of a man required to drink water when he had misnamed thirst. "Your Grace," said a voice from the shadows afterward, as Stannis left with the Tyrell peacock strutting beside him. A small, ordinary man with rough hands and an honest face stood and twisted his cap. "They say you are kind." Rhaegar tilted his head. "They are wrong," he said. "I try to be just." The man swallowed. "I smuggled onions, Your Grace, and salt fish, and some other bits besides, to Storm's End, for Lord Stannis. He is not a kind man, Your Grace, but his folk were hungry and I could not sleep for seeing their bellies at night." Rhaegar saw, suddenly and completely, the knuckles with their failed summer of scars on this man's hand where someone had once cut him and cut him again. "What is your name?" "Davos. Davos Seaworth, a flea bottom, of King's Landing," the man said with a kind of foolish pride. You did treason that was mercy, Rhaegar said. Lord Stannis will have you, I think. But ask me if I will cut your fingers for it. Davos looked at his hands, and then at Rhaegar, eyes unexpectedly wry. Will you, your grace? Rhaegar looked at the knuckles a long moment. No. I will have you keep your hands and use them to count ship stores for Lord Stannis until you are sick with numbers. Go. He turned to Ser Barristan as Davos stammered his gratitude. We will need men like him. Men who sleep wrongly if there is hunger they can answer. Men who break the law when they must, Barristan said. Men who honor its purpose when it is only a wall, Rhaegar said back, and Barristan bowed a little as if the thought had been a sword feint that had touched him. He moved through the days like a smith at a forge whose bellows never stop. Heat, strike, turn, quench, heat. He sat with Prince Doran and spoke of Luwin, and of Elaya's future, and of the children who still laughed. Doran's hand shook once, and Rhaegar pretended not to notice. Oberyn did not pretend, but let his anger coil out like a scent until the room was heavy with it. Keep your lion from our throat, Oberyn said, honey-hard, and we will keep our knife from his belly. Your knives are prettier, Rhaegar said lightly, and Oberyn's smile acknowledged the truth of it. He stood with Tywin Lannister and spoke of history and grief and work, and offered a betrothal that made the old lion's eyes narrow. Then evaluate, then accept. My son Aegon to your daughter Cersei, Rhaegar said. In due time, when the boy can walk without falling and the girl knows her prayers, the West may stop being a place the crown must fear. It might be, instead, the place that makes the crown shine. Tywin bowed. Only the muscle along his jaw betrayed the rage he swallowed and kept caged for the day his sword could not be stayed by courtesy. You are wise, your grace. I am something, Rhaegar said with the beautiful insolence that makes enemies as often as friends. Let us see if I can be a husband to the realm. Cersei curtsied before him and smiled, practiced, blossoming. When she lifted her head, her eyes darted to where Elia stood with Rhaenys on her hip and the prince in his nurse's arms. Afterward, in a gallery where the light was very fine and ravens nested in the tracery of the window, Jaime came and said, My father thinks you a softer man than you are. What do you think? Rhaegar asked. Jaime smiled without humor. I think you would love to be soft, but you were born with too many edges. Edges cut, Rhaegar said. They also carve, Jaime returned, and they left it there. That winter's first white raven came down from Old Town like a clean drift of parchment. Rhaegar held it and felt the cold in its bones. Winter declared itself, and the city folk put a brave face on the news with jokes about song and stew. The small folk laughed too loudly. The merchants counted. The lords looked at their granaries. Rhaegar asked the Iron Bank to send their cleverest men to talk in side chambers with Jon Arryn. If I am to be a good king, he told his hand, I must be a boring king. Let us do dull things that make strong houses. You will infuriate ballad mongers, Jon said. They may sing me well when I am dead, then, Rhaegar said. While I live, I would have millstones turning. He went north to Winterfell when the weather made travel barely less than foolish, because he could not make his peace with Eddard Stark by letter alone. The Godswood there was not like the sad little courtyards in southern keeps where gods were indulged like elderly aunts. It was a true wood, and when he stood before the old heart tree with its bloody tears, he felt a kind of humiliation like a man badly dressed at a friend's wedding. He folded himself inward and let the oldness speak. Eddard stood beside him, plain as a nail and tougher. I have brought her down, Rhaegar said, voice soft in the snow. I have brought her to the pool. I did it for her mother's sake, who is buried there, and for yours. I have brought her because I would not take her from this place as if you were a dog let live on sufferance in his own yard. Eddard's jaw worked. He shook his head once, a big dog ridding itself of flies. If you thought you needed permission from me to bring my sister to our father's gods, then you do not understand us at all. But thank you for asking for it anyway. Lyanna came through the birches with her cloak thrown back to show the heather blue gown Catelyn had insisted she wear. Catelyn had looked at her with a shrewdness born of being a lady in a place where lords' rules changed in a day's wind. Afterward she had taken Lyanna's hands and said, "You will not be kind to me and I will not be cruel to you. Let us have honesty instead." Lyanna had kissed her cheek and said, "I will be cruel if you are cruel, but I will be loyal if you are loyal." Catelyn had laughed then and said, "We will do very well." The boy, Jaehaerys, his breath a visible trick, went across the snow on Rhaegar's left hip with joy like a hot stone. The heart tree watched them. They made their offerings. Lyanna whispered a name that had not been said in this wood in 2 years, and the shape of grief went out of her shoulders and did not come back. At the feast that night there was a feel of thaw with the heat of 100 men and women and the music of a fiddle that tried to keep up with Rhaegar's harp and nearly did. Old Nan told a story about shadows with hands colder than iron, and when she said a king's name she did not say which king. Rhaegar sang once, quietly, and afterward he saw the way men looked at him as if something had been put into them, something not quite meat and not quite wine. He both loved and hated what he could do to a room with a string and a voice. In the morning he went to the rookery and wrote to the wall. The letter went south to go north, by a peculiarity of those snow-laden paths. He asked Maester Aemon questions whose shapes had no answers, and when the reply came on a bird with frost in its tail feathers, it was the firm, sad hand of a man very old and very clear. Prince Aemon Targaryen wrote, "The wall stands and will stand if men remember it is not merely stone but a word between worlds. Your grandsire forgot words and remembered only stone. Your father forgot both and remembered only fire. Remember all. Send men and corn. If the others come in my lifetime, I will be surprised but not startled. If they come in yours, do not let their story be one you are ashamed to sing." Rhaegar looked at the words a long while and then sent barrels and black cloaks and invitations to the north's smaller houses to send their second sons and their grudges to a place where work warms. He made the night's watch respectable. No, he allowed it to stop being despised. That was a small work that felt less small when snow made even the South's building of roads one long consideration of mud. Jon Arryn frowned at columns and nodded for more. Tywin's reply to the betrothal was a feast at Casterly Rock to which the crown was invited. Rhaegar did not go, but he sent Elia and the children and half the court, and they came back with stories of tunnels like swallowed sunlight and a lion's head carved tidy and smug on every second lintel. Elia came back with a tired mouth and eyes that had done too much smiling. "Cersei is all honey in her speech," she said. "She hates me already. She wants to be the thing you are," Rhaegar said. "It is not a small thing to forgive in another." "I will not forgive her," Elia said. "Not in cruelty but in pure clarity. I will outlive her. Sometimes that is the quieter route." He found himself, in those busy winters and careful springs, both the king he had feared becoming and the one he had wanted to be. There were days that were all parchment and grain, small men seeking small redress and a few big men seeking to be told how excellent they were. There were days that were sword and spectacle, and on those he remembered the way Robert's eyes had almost laughed as if to say it is good to be a man and alive. On both sorts of day, he came at evening to rooms where there were small feet thumping the rushes and Elia's patient hands, and a letter opened already for him because she knew he would not mind. Lyanna came to court once, in a spring when the trees were frothing with white as if they had washed their hair in blossom. She came because Eddard had told her to. It had been the right time, and not for rumor and not for spectacle, but because Jaehaerys would not learn his father's face from stories alone. The city gaped. The court whispered. The High Septon held a wet handkerchief to his nose for 2 days, and then sent Rhaegar a note that smelled of sanctimony and mildew, and used the words affront and godly with a frequency that suggested he liked their tang on his teeth. Rhaegar put the note away. He walked with Lyanna in the godswood of the Red Keep, a place that bore no resemblance to Winterfell's dark and honest grove. It was a courtyard with a weirwood imported like spices in the time of some old king who had wanted to seem pious for a fortnight while a girl cured him of it. The heart tree was a pale-faced stranger, and Lyanna laughed at it and spoke kindly in her own tongue to something far away. Elia met her in a sunroom, the children present, because there is hardly a thing so terrible that children cannot make it gentler. Rhaenys put her small hand in Lyanna's without ceremony and showed her a kitten. Aegon gurgled and grabbed a strand of Lyanna's hair and wound it like a trophy around his fingers. Lyanna unwound him seriously and kissed his head and called him little brother with a frankness that would have been brash in a man and was, in her, perfect. Elia and Lyanna looked at each other as two women look who have found themselves made objects by a man's history and a realm's appetite. Elia's smile was tired and brave. Lyanna's mouth had mischief in it and a kind of mercy that had claws. They spoke quietly. Rhaegar did not listen. He knew a holy thing when he saw it. The city slept uneasily for nights after Lyanna left it again. The gossip birds flitting in the rafters and the power of old stories gnawing where sense should have chewed. The faith muttered. A gang of zealots attempted to pull down the dragon carved over a lesser gate, and the city watch slapped them aside without heat. Rhaegar had Jon Arryn visit the sept and feed the poor in the king's name while the High Septon watched, and then had the High Septon dine in the Red Keep and find the stew better than he had expected and the company duller and therefore safer than he had hoped. Afterward Jon said, "We have put out that fire. Do not let it light again." "Fires," Rhaegar said, standing at the window with the city's 1,000 lamps making the night look embroidered. "There will always be fires. We will keep the wooden pails full." In Dorne they called his name softly now, often in the same breath as Elias, and that was a thing he took into himself like old wine. In the west the lion kept his claws sheathed, mostly. In the Vale the old hawk did what old hawks do, circled and watched and struck mice with elegance. In the Reach the Tyrells grew roses and told stories of how they had taken Stannis Baratheon down a peg. In the Stormlands a young lord became leaner and more iron-bound, and on winter nights, if a candle were held close, you might have read on his face the names of things he would never forget. In the Riverlands there were more fish in the baskets at market and fewer riders on the roads, and that told its own story. Years made their own counsel on the realm. Rhaegar saw his hair silver at the temples sooner than he had expected, and his hands grew calloused from quill and from bow and from the training yard. He could still play a boy's song and make women cry, and some nights he did. More often he played a slow, thoughtful thing that showed off nothing and left the room not sure why it felt eased. Aegon took to wooden swords with an insatiable appetite. Rhaenys taught her kitten tricks that no one else could make it do. Jaehaerys, who wept when the first snow fell as if something unspeakably beautiful had been revealed, grew with winter's quiet stubbornness, and took easily to books and to long walks with Howland Reed when the Frog Lord came visiting with a smile like a knife hidden in marshlight. Eddard Stark's letters were never more than 3 pages, and always contained some sentence written as plainly as a post. "You asked me to tell you when you are a fool, and so I tell you now," or "This man you favor will betray you for that man if you let him grow certain," or "I do not like this new captain of the city watch, though I cannot yet tell you why." Often Rhaegar went to bed angry with the hand that had written such lines. Often he woke relieved to have been angry and to be unblind by affection in the light. Cersei Lannister came to court as Aegon came to boyhood, and the court arranged itself around her like a pool around a cast stone. Jaime stood over her shoulder when propriety allowed, and over no one else's, and Rhaegar chose to find that both charming and manageable until it should need managing more sternly. Tywin sat in the west with his ledgers like a miser counting the gold in his heart. He sent exact replies to exact questions and never once moved a finger where it had not been requested of him. The silence itself had a weight. Rhaegar made sure not to be crushed by it. There were attempts, quiet ones, to break the realm back into the fight it had missed. A man of the faith, handsome and fierce and fond of his own words, spoke in streets about dragons and concubines and Valyrian sin. He found his purse fatter than any truly holy man's should be. Rhaegar had him to supper, listened to him in a room where there were carrots peeled on a plate and Aegon's practiced sword with its bits of chalk left on the guard, and afterward sent him home with a loaf and a story about a king who had listened when he could have cut. Men who like blood will judge you soft for not spilling it. Men who are not fools will wonder what you are planning. After the man went home, Varys came like a cat to the doorway and said, "Your Grace, it is dangerous, so gentle a hand. It is also a hand that will be remembered for not striking," Rhaegar said, and Varys smiled as if he had been given permission to sharpen both edges of a blade. There were darker things in the far north, always, that belonged to no council and no story men with comfortable fires liked to tell. Rhaegar went once, at last, to the wall. He wore furs that made him a bear and endured the laughter of men who had not thought to see a king climb their steps. He put his palm to the ice, and if there was a song in it, it was not one he knew. He walked with Maester Aemon in a slow old man's pace, as he had walked with his father once in the garden at Summerhall when Aerys had been a boy and hopeful. "It will be someone else's fight, perhaps," Aemon said, breath ghosting. "Or yours, or your son's. It is never the fight you want that comes. But the fights of necessity can be endured. Will the world be kind?" Rhaegar asked, with a ruefulness that made him sound very young indeed. "No," Aemon said without apology. "But it can be just." He came down from the wall with a cold that took a week to leave his bones and a conviction that in time, men would need something like courage and corn and a king who had not used up his city's love in games. He would not be a hero. He would be a steward. If he did both long enough, perhaps he would sleep. Lyanna came to King's Landing once more after her father's bones were brought down and buried in the crypt at Winterfell with the slow pride Stark custom allowed. She was heavier in the face, laughter deeper but rarer, and when she looked at Jaehaerys, there was the astonishment of a woman watching a stranger with her mouth and her brother's eyes. She said, "You are Etal?" And he said, as children do when they mean to wound, "You look tired." And then he brought her a stone he had found by the river with a stripe of quartz like a frost line, and all was forgiven. Elia and Lyanna played Sivas once and pretended it was not a cipher for the realm. Elia won with a move that sacrificed a dragon. Rhaegar watched and learned. In the 5th year of his reign, there was a rising on the Iron Islands, small and bitter as a boil. The Greyjoys had a way of making themselves important with blood. This time the legion was lanced with minimal loss. Victories that do not explode will not be sung. That is their merit. He sent Stannis with ships and men and a mandate to be as fair and as terrible as the situation demanded. Stannis returned with fewer ships and fewer men and an expression that had not lightened with the salt air. He handed Rhaegar a report written in a hand like a press. "You have done well," Rhaegar said, and meant it. Stannis's mouth flickered. "I will tell my men," he said. Winter gave way to a spring that had the indecent lushness of apology. The city swaggered a bit, and Rhaegar allowed it because sometimes you must let men forget cold to laugh. In that spring Elia sickened like a candle guttering. She smiled at him when he watched her draw breath as if it were work done to please him. He sat with her on a balcony where the city looked almost lovely and said, "We are older than we were when I first sang to you moody songs and made you think you were marrying a poet. You are a king," she said, and her hand on his was weightless and unimaginably heavy. "Do not become only that." She laughed when he told her she had never given him cheap advice. "And you have never taken any advice cheaply," she retorted. "I will not be angry for long." "Do not be angry at all," he said. Elia tilted her head. "You will miss my anger." "I already do," he said, and kissed her. In the night he went to the nursery and watched Rhaenys breathe and Aegon drool with boys' indifference and Jaehaerys, who had come from Winterfell this season, dream with his mouth a little open. He looked at them and felt the cold, kind hand of fear on his throat and breathed through it until it let him go. Elia did not die. She grew very thin and very proud and very tired. She went often to Dorne to drink sun and eat the fruit whose warmth you can feel in your palm. She lived. Tywin Lannister sent a physician with herbs that smelled of money. Rhaegar sent him back with thanks and no further purchase. "He is breeding favors," Jon Arryn said. "Do not give him sown fields in which to reap later." Rhaegar nodded and did not. The day Aegon first set a steel sword into a straw man and did not flinch when the blade bit, Rhaegar stood and watched a while. He did not correct the boy when he shifted his feet. He did not say the thing men say when they want to be felt as well as heard. "My son, you will be great." He let Aegon pull himself up into himself. Cersei, watching from the shade, applauded at inappropriate moments and smiled too widely. Jaime, in white, leaned back against a column with his arms folded and the habitual curl of the mouth that meant he did not care for any man's ritual. Rhaegar thought, "I will outlast this too," and later, in a private moment, he said to Jaime, "Keep your sister safe. Keep your vows bright." Jaime's laugh was quiet and sad. "Your Grace," he said, and did not promise anything he would break. On an autumn day when the sky had the clearness of a bell note and the gulls flew low along the river to suggest a storm, a rider came hard from the west and thundered into the court with the armor's black dust of the road on him. His horse's mouth foamed. He had the look of a man who had seen something he wanted not to have seen. Rhaegar took the letter and broke it and read Tywin Lannister's words that were tidy in ink and filthy in intention. There had been a business at Riverrun. Small men, big knives, a woman with a belly that had not yet made a house of itself. Peter Baelish had done something and not done something else, and Lisa Arryn had cried, and the rumor of a grievance had run ahead of itself on long legs. The West had moved coin in the Riverlands in amounts that said nothing and meant a flood. Hoster Tully's old wound was beginning to ache. Rhaegar rolled the letter and tapped it against his palm. "He tests the rope bridge," he said, so softly that only Varys and Jon Arryn, standing with him, heard. Varys smiled like milk skimmed, pale and easy. Jon Arryn's mouth tightened at the corners. "Do not send words," Jon said. "Send a presence." "Me?" Rhaegar asked. "Or you?" "Both," Jon said. "The king and his hand, and a court that is a caravan of stability." So they went, and the Riverlands, prickly and proud as the whiskers on a cat, received them with the hospitality resentment learns when it is made wise by hunger. Rhaegar sat at Hoster Tully's table and endured the old man's dry-bread courtesy. He watched Lisa's eyes cut to Peter Baelish and then away as if she were attached to him by a rope that had been hidden under her dress. He listened to Catelyn Stark speak with the strength of a woman whose household was a ship she could steer in fog and current both. Eddard came down from Winterfell with a speed that suggested there were reasons to travel fast. The matter, when they took it apart, proved to be not the sword as it had been brandished in whispers, but a knife in a sheepfold, and someone trying to prove himself a wolf. "Peter Baelish," Rhaegar said in a tone of mild curiosity when the young lord came to present himself with the cockiness that hides hurry. "Gulltown's ladders were not high enough?" "My ladders are as high as I build them," Baelish returned, smiling as if they had exchanged sweet cakes. "Your grace sings very sweetly. Men get lost hearing you." "That is why I sing rarely," Rhaegar said, looking at the way Lisa's hand clenched and her lap and relaxed and clenched again. "I prefer men who do not forget what they were doing." Baelish's smile only intensified. He would not be easily embarrassed into honesty or fear. Rhaegar dismissed him with bread and blankness and afterward said to Jon Arryn, "Watch him." "I watch everyone," Jon said. "Him doubly." Tywin's letters multiplied and folded. He did everything with ink that he could have done with spear, and it was cleverer and cost less. Rhaegar answered fewer of them than he might have, and more than he had patience for. "You must not make of him a denial," Jon said, "or he will be a wound you cannot stop touching." Rhaegar sighed and put down the pen and picked it up again and wrote to Tywin about taxes on wool, and at the end added a line about Aegon's sword work that suggested he and Tywin were two uncles boasting and not two men measuring distance with tape and pride. One night at Riverrun there was a quarrel. There are always quarrels. This one was a small thing and then not. Words about Lyanna and Elia and old laws and new beds. And Catelyn's face went still and Lyanna's erupted and Eddard sat like a tree with wind in him but roots sunk too deep to be torn. Rhaegar stood and did not leave. To leave would have been easy. He said quietly, "We will break what we have made if we let our wives fight for us." And Lyanna turned on him with eyes that could have felled a lighter man and said, "No, we will save it, because we will know what we are saving. If you have fought a woman, there is nothing more terrible left to fear." And Catelyn laughed, and the laughter broke the room open and the quarrel let out its breath like a winded animal and lay down. After Riverrun they rode south, and Rhaegar found on a hilltop a feeling like the shape of a song only you could not play it. He thought, "I have bound the realm with threads one at a time. It will hold until someone tries to cut them all at once." He thought, "Perhaps we will teach the next men not to be cutters." In King's Landing, Jaime cut his hair shorter and stopped laughing so much. His white cloak did not quite conceal his restlessness. Cersei's seats were full where she sat in the September. Elia's breath was easier some days and hard others. Varys's birds spoke of small conspiracies. like nettles in a field that must be hoed forever or else the crop fails. Jon Arryn's joints began to ache in wet weather, and he found himself near fire more and more. Rhaegar felt in himself the knowledge that he had made a piece of wood, and that he must be carpenter and not only king if it was to stand. On a night when a storm walked the sky with great strides, he took his harp into a room where no one could hear and played the song he had not played since before the river took the rubies. It was a tune with many places to fall into beauty and error both. He chose neither and held himself to the narrow road between. If prophecies had been made, and if he had been born with too much of them in his mouth, then let him live as a man lives when he has been told a story about himself and chooses to let the tale serve him and not the other way. The next morning he kissed his children, and Elia, and set a seat aside as he had always done for a woman who would never live in this city. He went to court and listened to a case about fish weirs on the Blackwater with the attention he would have given a duel. He thought of the wall and of Summerhall and of a weirwood's carved, bleeding face in a place where the snow makes honesty of men. He thought of the trident and of the hammer and the sword and the river running and running under everything with its own language. When at last winter came again with its white sheets tucked in tight, the city did not panic. They brought in wood early, they salted fish, they made jokes about kings in fur hats with frozen beards. Rhaegar stood at the window and watched the flakes flick like feathers beyond the glass. Jaehaerys sat at his feet, writing letters in a careful hand under Maester's eye. Rhaenys was teaching the kitten's granddaughter to bow. Aegon was with the swordmaster, sweating. Lyanna was in the north, laughing at some boy who thought himself a man on a piebald colt. Elia was sleeping a little, the lines on her face softened by the way a sleeping woman gives up the war she wages on waking. Jon Arryn was old and did not complain because there was no virtue in it. Tywin Lannister counted. Stannis Baratheon burned with a colder fire. Oberyn took a lover and a ride and both agreed with him. The wall stood. The weirwoods watched. The realm held. Rhaegar thought, I will be accused of making a dull story. And then, because he could not help himself, he thought, we must be so fortunate. He put his hand to the glass and felt the cold come through. It did not frighten him. It reminded him to keep the fires fed. He turned and went to the business of the day, and the river ran, and the crows grumbled and flapped, and men lay with wives and enemies, and children learned verses, and the season did what seasons do, which is to be endured and then remembered. In a room somewhere, a harp waited, strings bright as frost. In another, a sword hung that had not known a war that made a minstrel fat. It shone anyway, because men polished it against their own scruples. Sometimes at night he still saw the trident on his eyelids, and the rubies slipping away into a world where boys looked for them and made legends from their red shine. He heard, under this, the steadier sound the river makes when it is not forced to speak of death, and he slept. And when he woke, he took up what a man must take up. He held a realm made of threads, and he walked the road between stars and furrows, and he did not let go.